Welcome to this week's episode of the Inside Kingston podcast, where experienced professionals, entrepreneurs, and community leaders based in Kingston upon Thames are invited on to share their story with us. I'm your host, Amir Rochalina.
This week's episode of the Inside Kingston podcast is brought to you by Holland Harnham Wills, a financial planning and wealth management firm based in Kingston upon Thames. Holland Harnham Wills specialises in retirement planning for senior professionals and successful business owners. Visit hhw-uk.com to start feeling more relaxed and confident about your financial future.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. I'm joined today by Ian Thomas, Chief Executive of the Royal Borough of Kingston. With over 30 years of local government experience and known for his ability to unite communities and form strategic partnerships, Ian is heading up the team that will see the development of a better Kingston for residents, visitors, and businesses. And be sure to listen to the end, where Ian talks about the importance of having mentors throughout his careers and also describes some of the projects and initiatives that are taking place within our local community. So, whether you're interested in knowing more about the role of the Chief Executive in our borough, or would like to know a little bit more about how you could get involved in local government, then I hope you enjoy this episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. Welcome, Ian Thomas, to the Inside Kingston podcast. Ian, I'm really excited about this conversation because given your role as Chief Executive of the Royal Borough of Kingston, you and your team are at the front of the developments that aim to make Kingston a better place for residents, for visitors, and also for business. But to kick this conversation off, I'd like to go back in time, if that's okay. So where did you grow up?
Yeah, I grew up in a place called Sheffield. And I say a place called Sheffield because when I'm abroad and people ask me where I'm from, and it's obviously the UK, and I say Sheffield, they've never actually heard of it. They've heard of Manchester, but they've never heard, and they've heard of Leeds sometimes and Birmingham, but never Sheffield. And it always strikes me as being quite interesting, given that Sheffield's the fourth biggest city in the country. But yeah, I was born and raised in the north of England.
Tell us a little bit about your childhood growing up in Sheffield. Big family?
Yeah,
How was it?
Yeah, so I grew up to parents who were in the steel industry. So as part of the Windrush movement, they came across to help rebuild our country. And they worked in steel. They bought their own house. So I was brought up in a district called Meersbrook, in a house that they owned. So that was fortunate from their perspective in terms of stability. So a really stable place for the family, I think. But had lots of mates and a rich mix of kids that I grew up amongst. Went to Carfield Primary, Newfield Secondary. These were comprehensive inner city schools. And again, mixed in terms of kids that went there and had a happy childhood learning, not learning as much as I should have done because I was derailed by my football ambitions. I signed for Sheffield United Football Club when I was 14 years of age.
Oh, wow.
And because of that, didn't do as well as I should have done at school and left with 3 O-levels. There you are.
Well,
So
that's interesting you say that because today, of course, happens to be A-level results day as we record this interview. And I understand you left school after taking your O-levels and then you went to work not in football, but in voluntary groups like the NSPCC and Shelter. Is that right?
Yeah, you're well researched. You can see you've done your research there. So I did. I left school with the 3 O-levels and moved to London because my parents decided to return to their native Jamaica. Okay. And I had the option of going to live in Jamaica with them or not. I decided to stay in England because I'm British, I'm English. It's what I know. It's the country I love, and stayed with older siblings in a place called Rainham in Essex. And started working at the NSPCC because I always wanted to do something that contributed to people less well off than I was. Not that we were well off, but you know what I mean. I wanted to help vulnerable people, people that were struggling with social difficulties. I was also decent with numbers, so I kind of married my natural aptitude with numbers for a role as an accountancy assistant for the NSPCC at a time when many kids who were smart with numbers were going into the stock market. So I made a conscious decision to work in the charity sector at that time.
And then you left the voluntary sector to go into local government. Could you give us a bit of a summary of your career to date?
Yeah, it's been a fantastic journey. I think that it was a conscious decision I made when I was nearly 18 to move into the local authority part of the world because I thought at that time there'd be more opportunities to make a bigger difference ultimately than I was working at the NSPCC. So, pretty young to be making those decisions. My wife often says that I've got a head older than my years, and it's exemplified by that sort of decision at that age. And I worked for the London Borough of Newham, Tower Hamlets in those early days when Tower Hamlets were led by a Liberal Democrat administration that were piloting neighbourhood working to an extent never seen before.
Oh, wow.
And I worked at Poplar neighbourhood. I rose to the heady ranks at the age of 21 as a principal officer working in Poplar neighbourhood next to Mile End Station on Southern Grove. And then I had a life-changing event in terms of a child being born. I had a relationship at that point with a woman back in Sheffield, and my son was born on the 28th of May 1992, and I decided to move back to Sheffield to be with him and mum, and made a conscious decision even then to raise a child in Sheffield rather than London, because I was worried about gangs and the influences on young boys, particularly young black boys, even then in London in the early 90s. So made that decision, went up there and worked in the charity sector again. Health information for Nottingham teenagers is where I worked, and left to pursue a career in the retail music industry.
Oh, wow.
So a bit of a change. Yeah, in 1994, I decided to run my own record shop. Yeah.
Okay, that's really interesting. And how did you find sort of life in the independent retail sector versus local government, say?
Very different, very different. That's why I have a huge respect for entrepreneurs and people that run their own businesses, because I've seen firsthand how difficult it is. Unfortunately for me, I decided to do it at a time when I also had a family and a mortgage to run, and I didn't dedicate myself 100% to the business. I was doing other things to make money, like doing music events, a bit of DJing as well in the sort of early mid-90s just to try and make ends meet. So I wasn't focused on the shops. I say shops, there were two I opened two at the same time, and maybe it would have been the right thing to just open one, like the best entrepreneurs, Alan Sugar and Richard Branson, take their time. I went in and had two, opened two at the same time, and I crashed and burnt. And I think that within 2 years had to close and go back to work because it didn't work. And one of the solitary lessons for me is that you can learn from adversity as well as you can from doing things well. So that was an interesting time in my life. I went back to work for Shelter, the housing charity in Nottingham, in 1996, and worked there for a year before going back to local authority work with Derby City Council and then Trafford. The work in Trafford took me into a senior capacity at assistant director level, working on health and social care issues and transformation. A really good time. Learned a lot from lots of people there. Implemented the first social care system for SAP. So we worked with SAP on their first social care system, their first market entry into that world. And we transformed together, working with partners and other people, transformed the service from a very poor service to one that was excellent in Trafford. So that was really, really good. And then in 2006, I moved to Derbyshire County Council. So Derbyshire County Council, a very different local authority to where I am now, very different to Trafford, a smaller unitary, a place it spans 1,000 square miles, has almost 800,000 residents, and I was an assistant director responsible for finance and HR and IT, but I also took on the brief of transforming children's services, and it was in this role where I learned much about working across a system to improve outcomes for vulnerable children, young people and their families. And at the age of 41 in 2011, became the director of Derbyshire Children's Services. So, and that again was sort of, it was a big step, because the person that I was following had been in place for decades and had been with Derbyshire for all of his career. So stepping into those shoes was quite daunting.
There's quite a bit there that I want to unpack in this conversation, because I think that's so interesting. Firstly, you mentioned there this feeling of being able to learn from adversity, but it also strikes me that the other side of that coin is also true. So, for example, when I look at your LinkedIn profile, you were very vocal about the fact that you have proactively sought out mentors throughout your career. So could you tell me a little bit, or tell us a little bit, about the value of seeking mentors, and a little bit about some of the people that have inspired you throughout your career too?
I think it's really a critical point that you raise. I although I left school with 3 O levels, I soon caught up, and I've got a master's degree in developing professional practice, and I'm also qualified at master's level as a coach and mentor. And through life experience, through professional experience, and that level of study, I've appreciated the value of having mentors and people that you can look up to and learn from. And I'm open to learning anyway. I'm still, we learn every single day. During my career, I've had the benefit of working with some exceptional people. Like, I talk about Mike Cooney at Trafford. I talk about Bruce Buckley in Derbyshire. More recently, people like Malcolm Newsom, Sir Alan Wood. But I've also been inspired by the efforts of other people that have been before me, like Derek Anderson, who was the chief executive of Lambeth, Heather Rabatz, also a chief executive. So I've been inspired by people like that. I've always been open to learning, not just from people who are at higher ranking, as it were, but also from people who are peers, from partners, and from my staff. You can learn an incredible amount from people who work for you, because they have tremendous potential and ideas themselves. So I describe myself, I think, as a bit of a servant leader. I'm absolutely here to serve elected members in this capacity, but also to serve the people who work for me, because it's my duty to ensure that I provide, through my management teams, as much support for them as possible. So mentoring and taking guidance and learning from people is critical to our development, and working towards what we term in coaching as self-efficacy. Mm-hmm. So if you work towards a position of self-efficacy, you have to be open to learning continuously. And I look to people even now, Sharon White, who's just been appointed the chairman. I think she's retaining the actual chairman title of the sort of John Lewis partnership. I'm incredibly inspired by her and what she's done. So I do look for people who inspire me. I seek counsel wherever possible, because you can't do this type of stuff alone. So up to this point where I got to in Derbyshire, I was already under the tutelage of Bruce Buckley, who was a fantastic social care leader, but was also learning from the peers I had around me. Rachel Dickinson is another example, who's the current president of the Association of Directors of Children's Services, and just trying to suck in as much learning as I possibly could. So, and that stays with me to this very day. So, and especially being the first, I was the youngest director in the country at the time. The average age of directors of children's services was 55. I was 41 when I first got that position.
Wow.
And one of the only three black directors of 152. So when you're that type of situation, all eyes are on you. The only way you can get through it, I think, is by taking advice and counsel.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think those are words of wisdom there, Ian. And it's funny how in speaking with other local business owners, that's the mentality that has helped them achieve their own success as well. Now, switching gears slightly, for the benefit of our listeners, could you describe your role as Chief Executive of the Royal Borough of Kingston?
Yeah, I can. But before doing that, if I may,
of course,
Amir, just to what prepared me well for this role, I think, was the Rotherham role, where I'd been the director of Derbyshire for a while, and for your listeners, these roles are not about just working with local authority people. They are about working with partners and the private sector, voluntary sector, etc. So we'd done a great job in Derbyshire. We secured a great Ofsted rating there. And I came in one day and there was an email from the commissioner appointed by the DfE and the Secretary of State, who were looking for someone to lead the Rotherham recovery. And just to say, that experience of working in that situation, in a place that had been afflicted by the very worst of our social ills, child sexual exploitation, and working across the many multifarious partnerships that I have done and working with those communities, absolutely gave me the behaviours, skills, abilities and behaviours to do the job that I do now at this brilliant Royal Borough, of which I am the Chief Executive.
That's an interesting point you make there, Ian. If you don't mind me butting in, because I was going to ask you about this later in our conversation, but I think it's pertinent to ask it now. Of course, just to clarify for our listeners, you mentioned there a time in your career where you were in Rotherham and as a strategic director for children and young people services, and this is after the J report into sexual exploitation of children in that community. And of course, it goes without saying, this must have been a really difficult time, not only for local authority, but also the community, given that it's such a sensitive issue. And I'm curious, actually, about the mindset that you had to employ in your leadership role at the time. So, could you tell us, for example, how you helped the community regain a sense of trust in the system again during that time?
Yes, I can, and it's a really pertinent line of inquiry, because you can get this wrong, and that there's no doubt in my mind that in the early days, I made some mistakes. We all do, but I was hell bent on getting to understand at a granular level what those survivors and victims of CSE had gone through, and not to sound too much of a cliche here, but sharing their pain and giving them a sense that I was in it with them, but at the same time being really honest and saying to them that I will never have their expertise because I've not been abused in that way, and by being really honest about that and being open to learning from those who had suffered, put me and the team in good stead. I think it was also important to exhibit a real empathy with the workforce and to listen to them. So lots of listening exercises about what it was like to work for Rotherham at that time, but also to adopt appreciative inquiry to celebrate the things that we were doing well. Because people, I was of the opinion, and I remain of the same opinion today, that people do not come to work to do a bad job. People don't get out of bed and say, oh, I'm going to do a bad job today. I'm going to, ignore a child today or leave a family in dire straits today. They are victims of circumstances, and there were lots of things that were conspiring against them, least of all, poor accountability and poor leadership across the system at that time, which has completely been turned around today because of the efforts of so many people. So my approach was about empathy. It was around listening. It was about working with people on solutions and developing a vision for children, young people and families that was a highly aspirant vision. I wanted them to receive outstanding services and for us to deliver outstanding outcomes. And I wanted people to think of every single child that they were supporting as though that child was their own biological child.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ensure that within our DNA, we were thinking of, what would this be like for my own children? Would this be good enough for my own children if I was offering this service? And we worked hard on asking ourselves that question every single day. And of course, 3 years later, we'd had the confirmation that we'd transformed the service from inadequate bottom 6% to the top 16% in the country being good with outstanding features. And that's a mark of the work of many people operating across the council, our elected members, our partners, people in our community, our business leaders, everyone coming together to embrace what Nelson Mandela said, and that is that it takes a village to raise a child.
That's exactly it. And of course, Ian, you were awarded a CBE for your work in recognition of your services to local government and to children's services. What was it like getting that letter through the post?
It was a shock, a complete shock, because you don't. It's not, this doesn't happen every day, does it? That you walk through your door and there's a letter from the cabinet office. So there was and I opened it and read it a few times, and in a sense of disbelief, really, and I couldn't help but reflect on the many thousands of people who are due credit for much of the work that I've done. So the staff that I've worked with, the partners that I've worked with, people in the communities that I've worked with, and of course my mentors and people that support me and my family, So I was thinking more about the support that I'd had and the fact that this honour was a reflection of so many people. I'm standing tall on the shoulders of so many people, accepting that honour. So it doesn't happen every day. Once I got over the shock, you've got to then contain yourself, because you almost have to sign the Secrecy Act not to tell anyone about it. And the letter's very formal about that. But I'm grateful to so many people for it.
Yeah, you should be really proud of that, Ian. So if I go back to the original question, and if I ask you again about your role, and I'm also curious about it, because I think I understand the role of a chief executive of a borough, but it would be good to hear from you.
I've been appointed to lead the staff that deliver services for people in our communities. And the council, I'm the head of the paid service, and the Local Government Act stipulates that each authority has to have a head of the paid service. So basically, I'm the principal advisor to the leader and her administration. It's very clear that we have the leader of the council, who's Councillor Liz Green. She's formulated a Liberal Democrat administration, having secured 38 seats at the last local elections. But I'm here to serve all our 48 elected members, and in doing so, lead a team of staff in delivering services to support vulnerable children and adults and their families, to ensure that we have good schools and education provision throughout life. So that includes our adult learning provision, as an example, to ensure that the roads are maintained and well kept, that we've got libraries, that we've got a cultural services offer, and that we develop an infrastructure to support our communities now and in the future. So there's a range of community services and regulatory services within all of that. That includes, as an example, we have a housing delivery target. We've just closed the consultation on our local plan, and we need to balance protecting the rich heritage and the beautiful open spaces and our conservation areas and the green spaces that we have, whilst delivering housing targets to deal with people we have who are homeless without a home, and people and the growth of the borough that's projected to rise steeply over the next few decades. So we have to keep an eye on the sort of strategic challenges that are facing us, as well as deal with the day-to-day running of services that people pay their council tax for. And it's a tricky role in that many people, people pay their council tax, but don't see the bulk of the money that we spend. So we spend the majority of our money on children and adult social care, but only a few residents benefit from that, as it were. So we're all contributing to the greater good. Most people see the universal services on their doorstep, such as bins and the refuse, the refuse collection service that you see every day. People use the roads every day. We work with TfL on the transport system, and people use those services every day. But much of what we spend our money on, residents don't see. And we also have, I think, and you touched on this earlier in talking about the business sector, a role to play in shaping the place of Kingston and working with our businesses so that we create an infrastructure where our over 8,000 businesses can thrive in this borough. So I'm pro working with all sectors to ensure that we create a better Kingston together, but with the steer of the leadership here. And I was excited to apply for this job because of our leader, Councillor Liz Green, and her group's manifesto and what she was talking about in terms of creating a better Kingston. And that's what drew me to this position in the first place. So, one of privilege, a very complex web of services in a challenging time for local government with, reducing resources but increasing demand.
Ian, what are some of the key lessons that you've learned in your career today?
Really good question. I think it's about trying to be authentic. So there's lots of talk and lots of research to authentic leadership. And the way I describe it, or my interpretation of authentic leadership, is just being really open and honest about what it is you know, what it is you don't know, and being open to learning. So for me, I have no issue with saying I got it wrong, because I will sometimes. And that's part of being an authentic leader. I also have learned the value in distributing power. So, and something else I'd commend people to look into a bit more is distributed leadership. And that's about empowering people and playing to people's strengths and giving people the permission to innovate and solution find. And I believe that helps to motivate the workforce, but also it means that we then tap into the rich potential that we have within our organisations and across partnerships. So I've learned a great deal about that. Evaluating the impact of what you do is also something that I've learned, because if you don't evaluate the impact, then you could be in a situation where you're what a former cabinet member of mine called a busy fool. And we don't want to be busy fools. We want to ensure that we use our time judiciously and to the very best for the very best impact for our communities. So, if you're going to have high productivity and you are going to focus on improving outcomes for people, then you need to evaluate the impact of what you're doing. And I think if you are committed to evaluating impact, I think you are well on the road to sort of a continuous improvement. And then the final thing I'd probably throw in, of many others that I could cite, is around celebrating success and capturing that. So appreciative inquiry is really good for that, because irrespective of what's happening, there'll be things that are going well, and I think it's important that people recognise when things are going well, celebrate that, and use that energy to tackle the things that aren't going so well. Because in every single organisation, we'll all have things that we could do better, and we need to be really mature and honest about those areas where we need to improve. And appreciative inquiry is a great way of using success and the energy from that to tackle some of the areas where we do need to pull our socks up.
Ian, what would be your advice for young people who want to start participating more in local government?
Well, I think there's more that we can do as a local authority, and in terms of the local authority sector. We are responsible for educating all children and young people in the borough. Through our head teachers and our governors and our multi-academy trusts and our, all the learning providers that are out there. But the statutory responsibility rests with the local authority still. So, and to ensure we champion high standards of education for all our children. So we have an opportunity. And a responsibility, I feel, to reach out to those young people and ensure that they know that our doors are open. So that's the first and foremost responsibility on us, and we don't do enough of it. And I would say to anyone, any young person in Kingston, I would encourage them to attend committee meetings, to attend meetings of our cabinet, and if they see consultations that are underway, do get involved with the many consultations that we're running. So at the moment, as an example, we've declared a state of climate emergency here in Kingston. Our members have led on that, and something great for our young people to get involved in, because we know that lots of young people are mobilised and passionate about global warming and saving the planet and tackling climate change. And so there's an ideal opportunity in Kingston for young people to get involved with that. Other things like air pollution, which is obviously linked to this agenda also, and tackling air quality. Again, our young people have lots to say and will have lots of ideas, bustling with ideas, and I would encourage them to get involved with us on that. And we'll be doing much more work on skills. We've got a plethora of programs and activities underway at the moment to improve our engagement with our communities, our diverse communities. And I would appeal to our young people to get involved. So as an example, skills, and I mentioned skills, and ensuring that we, our already highly skilled residents continue to enhance their skills, will help tackle health and well-being challenges, but also solidify our supply chains, which is important, particularly as we're approaching a degree of uncertainty regards Brexit. So the uncertainty around Brexit, around supply chains, will be around workforce capacity, and I think it's important for all of us across all sectors to shore up our workforce going forward, and we can do that through skills enhancement. So something else for our young people to get actively involved in.
An area that is of personal interest to me, given that I'm a financial planner, is around how the council does its own financial planning. So could you tell me a little bit about the budget situation of the Royal Borough of Kingston, given the news about local council budgets that we hear in the news today?
Yeah, I think the situation could be described as a perilous one. We have lost £66 million in funding since 2010.
Wow.
Over the next 3 years, so in the next 3 years, we face a budget gap of £22 million. which represents, for London councils generally, a loss of 63% of our funding. So whether you're a family or an organisation, you can understand what impact a reduction of 63% of your funding might have on you. So what it means for us is having to think more creatively and innovatively about how we run our business, how we save money through sharing services, becoming more efficient, improving our productivity, looking at how we buy goods and services, how we commission, looking a bit more strategically around that, how we manage demand for our high cost services in social care. Our position here in Kingston is exacerbated by an accumulated deficit of £14 million for children with special educational needs and disabilities and with additional needs. So in the high needs block of our schools funding, we also have a huge deficit balance in there, which means that we need to, as well as save money, we need to shore up our reserves position because of the huge deficit on the dedicated schools grant. So our challenges are complex and will require savings, transformation, but also in some cases cutting some services, not doing what we've always done. And that's important for our communities to understand. And it's because we receive no government grant. We are wholly reliant on local taxation and local fees and charges in Kingston.
As we start to wrap up, I'd like to ask you a few quick fire questions that our listeners are always interested in. So, Ian, what do you do to relax outside of the office?
I do Wing Chun. So I've been studying and practicing Wing Chun now for a number of years, the martial arts. And I'm a bit of a sports fanatic. And my team is Sheffield United. And I spend time tweeting about them at the weekend when I'm relaxing.
Are there any books that you've recently read that you'd recommend to our listeners?
Yep. The Chimp Paradox. The Chimp Paradox by Professor Stephen Peters helps you to understand how your brain works, helps you to make more rational decisions. I've recently read Energy Intelligence at Work by Claire Chidley, which is about how we ensure that we develop, or how we can develop energetic workplaces, and in ensuring that, and if you can do that alongside recognizing the value of emotional intelligence, you can develop really exciting working environments that deliver excellent services. So I've read that recently. And I've read something recently called The Community Paradigm by a network called the NLGN Network. NLGN Network. And that's essentially talking about models for local government today that empower our communities and make the best use of assets within communities in this new era of dramatically reduced central government funding and local authorities having to do things in a different way to the previous years. So that was also a good read for me.
Are there any movies or TV series that you've recently watched that you'd recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, of course. Game of Thrones. I don't understand people who have not watched Game of Thrones.
Well, I'm one of them. So,
so I don't understand you, but it's great. So Game of Thrones. I am a fan of The Sopranos. That was a fantastic series. I'm a fan of Breaking Bad, stuff like that. And my guilty secret is X Factor and Strictly Come Dancing.
Nothing wrong with that, Ian. Finally, where can people go to find out more about you and the Royal Borough of Kingston?
Okay, so we've been doing lots of work. I think I referenced earlier about the work we're doing on community engagement. One of the challenges that our leader put to me when I started was, look, we really want to redouble efforts to engage with our communities. And one of the manifestations of that directive is the website development. So, we hold our hands up and say that, look, our website's not the best in the world, right? The ratings are quite poor in terms of being able to do transactions with the website, not very intuitive, and needs to improve. So we've been working with our communities on this, and around 2,400 people have been working with us on developing our new website. Wow. And as a result, we aim to improve the percentage of transactions through it, of council transactions, from 20% to 80%. So, the reason why I say that is because the website is the way to get information. A lot of people do use it, but it's not as good as it should be. I reckon once we've launched a new one, with the help of our citizens, you'll see a much better website at the end of this year and beyond. So, go to the website, see what you can find out, or email in to people at the council. There are some published contacts at the council. Get involved with us. We want to work with as many people as we possibly can, and I've been really pleased and heartened by the response from people I've met in this first sort of 7 months, and I'm really excited about the future as we work together to create a better Kingston.
That's brilliant. And for the benefit of our listeners, I will make sure that I link up those resources on the show notes. Ian, thank you for joining us here on the Inside Kingston podcast. It's been a pleasure getting to know your story.
Yeah, thank you, Amir. Thanks for being so well researched.
That wraps up another episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. Make sure to check out our guests' website, pay them a visit, and help spread the word about what they're doing. If you have any questions or know someone who should be a guest on the show, please feel free to get in touch. I would also love it if you could go to iTunes and leave us a review and a 5-star rating. We work hard to bring on some great guests, and getting a review from you is one way to help the podcast rate well on iTunes so that others can find and enjoy the show too. Thanks for listening.